In a previous video, I had started building a mini camper for my mini truck. Now I need to do a little more work on it. The first step is removing it from the truck. I built it while it was all bolted down, which means I couldn't get to a lot of stuff. Now I need a little more access. That mini truck actually looks pretty funny as a flatbed. Now into the shop we go. In the last video, all I'd done was the framework and the skin. Since I assembled it right on the truck, there were some spots in that framework I couldn't get to with the welder. And that's why I assembled the whole thing with self-drilling screws. I can take it all apart, finish all the welding, add a little bit of paint, put it back together, seal it up, and then I actually have a finished shell. I might even get to the interior stuff too. Before teardown, I had one thing to build first. These portable solar panels were very portable, but they were kind of a pain to use. Solar panel deployed. I laid one out flat. I'm making a quick rack that'll hold both of them, and that is going to go on top of the camper. I didn't really mention it in the last video, but in the ends of these main tubes, I installed a little threaded fitting. So I've got 3/8 threads right there and right there. Those are right at the intersection of the main structure, so I can attach stuff to it and mount it on the roof of this camper. And that's where this is attaching. Now, there's a lot of ways you can figure out how 4-bar linkage works. If I want to do these right, I model it up in SolidWorks and have all the pieces and move them around, and then I can visibly see exactly where stuff goes. But you can also visibly see it if you have it mostly made. I made the 2 bars, I know where my bottom pivots are, I'm not going to change those. I put these 2 bars where they're going to grab the grommets of the solar panel, so that's fixed. The other variable I really need to figure out is how long to make the links that connect the two. My goal is to have this be able to tip over pretty decently, and I want this bar to be able to hit the edge on the curve. That way it doesn't go flopping over on the side, and the bar isn't too far back where this edge can hit the solar panel itself. I put it over in position where I want this to be. I'm going to measure from my pivot point to my future pivot point. I got 14 inches. Now this is obviously a lot shorter, but let's see what happens if we make that into 14. By rotating on this bar, this length will stay about the same. Then I pivot the whole thing over to my 14 inches or so, and that is the angle I've got. And that looks pretty good. And when it's level, it'll be about here, and that'll give me a good gap to the roof, which I do want to have. Since everything was fitted in place, I want to make sure it goes back where it came from. I'm going to label everything with a directional arrow for forward and up, and then where it goes. So this would be the driver's side rear window. I guess I don't need to label it window. I probably could tell it's a window. All right, forget labeling it window. Driver's side rear I think is fine. Now to remove 500 plus screws. This is the only spot in the sheet metal that really didn't fit well. It's got quite a lump to it here. In the previous video, I tried to straighten this out while it was installed, which didn't work really well. Starting to smell like burned sock. I'm gonna try to do it again now that it's out here. It's not quite red, but I'm gonna give it a shot because I'm impatient. That straightened out pretty good right away. Calling that done. When I made these cutouts, I did it while I was on the frame, and there's a lot of big jagged burrs that I couldn't get to easily. So I'm going to take a flap wheel and take those off. I want to mention one thing. When you're working on an edge like here, while the wheel spins, you want to make sure the wheel is drawing it tight. So you want that material in tension. If you're spinning it this way and you hit the metal, it's easy for that metal to lift up. Lifting up will jam it in the wheel more, which will make the whole thing fall over and go flying and get all bent up. So on this thin stuff, always make sure you're pulling on the material, never pushing. Another thing I couldn't do mounted to the truck is put a window right here. But now I can. I'm about to do something I wouldn't normally do. I don't feel it's a necessary step, and I'm doing it for the sake of cleaning. So it's just weird. What I have here is zinc chromate primer. A lot of it. Places that use this professionally have to use it before it expires. Otherwise, they got to get out of the facility. And it's hard to get out of the facility because this has some nasty chemicals in it and is considered hazardous waste. And hazardous waste normally isn't a good thing. But once this stuff dries, it's not hazardous anymore. It's a really good corrosion preventative primer. So I want to get rid of this big pile, and the best way to do that is by spraying it on sheets of metal. This one expired quite a few years ago. We just got to make sure it becomes liquid again. I really like these little paddle stirrers for breaking up chunks on the bottom. There's a lot of solids on the bottom after sitting this long. Stuff looks like it's thickened up a little bit. Probably have to use some thinner too. It's way over 100 degrees out here. The gun is getting so hot I can barely touch it. I think the heat from the compressor is getting to it and adding to what I already have. I gotta keep switching hands while I spray. That actually worked out really well, because on a symmetric part like this, it's actually easier to do both sides the same when you switch hands in the middle. I've already painted the inside and it's dry, so I'm going to stick a piece of tape on it and transfer my notations onto the tape. I'm going to be painting over my original notes. It sure is drying fast. Probably not properly, but fast. Figure I should probably mention that there are pre-treatments you're supposed to do before putting this primer on, but I'm ignoring all that and just going with scuffing with the Scotch pad, because I've already reached an uncomfortable level of doing things correctly, and I don't want to go over the limit here. This could very quickly become less fun. The surface texture was pretty chunky, so I decided to try filtering the primer. That was probably a good idea. There were still some solids left in there. Filtering the primer made it come out a lot smoother. Actually looks halfway decent. Last panels are done. I'm going to let them dry and go back to work on the frame. When I originally put this together, I bolted everything to the bed and then welded all the stuff together. I just welded what I could to hold it in place. Now that I got it flipped up, I can go and get all those seams that were facing down and get this whole thing welded up completely, so we can be as sturdy as possible. When you have this many welds, it's easy to miss something. So I'm going to use a trick to make sure I get everything. Every time I finish welding up an intersection, I hit it with some weld-through primer. That way, I know it's done. And then, it's like one of those little make the boxes game. When I have two corners that have a line connecting them, I can hit the line. I don't have to worry if I missed anything. If it's primered, it's done. Next time we're going to build something simpler. There's a lot of welds to this thing. Then I came up with the crazy idea of grinding the welds flat to make mounting interior panels easier. I did what I had to with the weld-through primer, but that stuff's expensive. So now I'm going to use up more of that leftover primer. I checked the weather this morning before I started this. They said there was a 0% chance of rain. Apparently there is no water falling out of the sky right now. I'm just imagining it. I'm assuming this stuff is waterproof and dry already. I flipped the frame around to get it all around the tubes. Hopefully I got everything. One thing I learned in this old project, the ultimate boat trailer, is when you attach steel to steel frame, it gets really rattly. I'm doing some more shop cleaning. I've got a bin here of old expired adhesive type things. I've got silicone, I've got RTV, expired in 2019. All this stuff is going to go bad unless I use it up. I'm going to use that stuff to keep the panels from rattling. I'm starting with the smallest panels first because I know I don't know what I'm doing. So that way I can learn what I'm doing and it's a little easier to move around. I'm going to have to know what I'm doing once I get to those big ones. They look a bit tricky. I'm putting these self-drilling screws back in just to hold it in place while that RTV dries. Finally ready to try the big panels. Every single contact point has a bead on it now, and that will keep it from rattling at any surface. Another thing I learned is put the driver they're going to use to install those screws within reach. Don't put it down over somewhere else or you have to go get it afterwards. Now I've got 2 screws installed in this panel in a spot where I can see them, so that way I can use those to line the whole thing up. The drill part of the screw is holding it in. You can push that into the old hole, then zip them in. Not too tight, because there's still a little bit of wiggle available. Then I put the screws in the furthest corners. By keeping these attachment points as far away as possible, it will align as close as I can get it. And now with the center ones, I can actually start tightening them down. For the same reason they do this with heads and manifolds and all that, you start in the center and work your way outwards, everything goes flat. If you start on the outside and get the ends down, you can create a hump in the middle. These self-drilling screws are not intended for repeated use. They wear out the holes, they wear out the screws. Some heads broke off while installing them. Some heads broke off while removing them. But I never intended these to be permanent. They were just to get my hole locations in a quick and easy way. Now I gotta switch them out. I'm taking out every other screw so it's held in place, but I can replace half the fasteners. Now that I have every other fastener removed, I'm going to drill them out with a 191 drill bit. When I replace those self-drilling screws, I'm going to replace them with rivets. The slipless rivet is a solid rivet, which is just a solid piece of metal. We just pop that through the hole, and then we just switch it into place. And there we're installed. A solid connection, no water leaks. That's a really good solution, if you can use it. In my case, I have a tube frame with sheet metal on the outside. There's nowhere to get the other jaw to do the squishing, which means I need to go to a pop rivet. This is a 2-piece design. We actually have the rivet part, and then a little piece of metal that goes all the way through to a lump on the end. You pull on that, and that's what does the squishing. One quick note, this is a 3/16 rivet, and that is a 3/16 hole, and it doesn't fit. These almost always need a slightly bigger hole. This is a 191 drill, and now they fit through fine. And that would secure fine, but there's another problem. Remember how I mentioned this was 2 pieces? Eventually that center piece will fall out and you get daylight through there, which means you also get water. So that style rivet is going to leak for sure. Which brings us to another kind of rivet. This is a different type of pop rivet. It has a closed end. So even though there's 2 pieces, the end of this piece is buried in the middle of the rivet. The rivet itself has no opening. This provides the same fastening. There's no way to have any kind of opening at all, unlike this one. So that will be waterproof. But those are more expensive, and I don't like expensive. I priced them out to buy the 500 plus rivets I needed. It would be like over $200. I went on eBay looking for something else. For $120, I got this. These are a stainless steel closed end rivet. 4,000 rivets. I tried to hook this straight on the box, I just ripped the box. Yeah, almost 34 pounds of rivets. But they are way too long. In theory, these are only supposed to grip stuff that's more than a 1/4 inch thick. Let's see if that's true. It took a lot more travel and sticks out a lot further, but it's still secure and it's still waterproof. Now I can go ahead and install my rivets on every other hole. The top goes across the whole thing, so I gotta have both sides ready to go. Ran into a few broken off screws on this side. I had to drill them out, so I drilled them out with the rivet bit, so it's already rivet hole sized. And I marked them with an old piece of tape I had stuck to the other side, so that way I know where the holes are gonna be too big, even after the layers on top. Sorry about the bad lighting on this. I gotta do this in the morning. It's supposed to be 103 today, and I don't wanna deal with that. Now I want the front layer to overlap the rear layer, so as you're driving forward, nothing gets pushed under the seam. So I'm gonna start with the rear first and then put the front on top of that.
More adhesive.
I'm gonna slide the back over the front for now. I got that all gooped up. Now hopefully I can gracefully lift that front up and slide it backwards without ruining everything. Yeah, it worked mostly okay. Didn't smear too much of the goop out of the way. I think I can start attaching the screws. When I was putting the skin on, I did a much better job than usual at actually hitting the framework I was intending to hit. I only missed in 2 spots. You can see daylight right there. This one, I forgot I'd missed it and went and drilled it bigger. I just put a wash on it to cover it up. And I know this is right on the edge, so I'm going to drill a hole right next to it where the beam is. Now I'm going to take a flat washer, make sure it's big enough to cover up the old hole, and add a little goop. We'll drop the whole thing in here. And now I know for sure that is never going to leak. See this little spot right here? That was that big dip that I straightened out earlier. I'm totally fine with that. My process was taking out these self-drilling screws, drilling the hole bigger, and then installing a rivet. One thing about that is when you drill out the hole, you have bare steel again. And that corrosion preventative primer doesn't protect you from corrosion when you drill it away. So there's another technique you use when you assemble stuff like this called a wet installation. You ever got a cup of the same primer? Take your rivet, dip it in, pop it in the hole. We're gonna drop a few of these in and let them sit there for a few minutes. Now where I am is not a rust-prone area. And I've done way too many of these wet installations in my life to actually enjoy doing it. So I'm just doing this for a demonstration. This is the last time I'm doing this whole camper. Everything else is going in dry. Because I don't like doing this, and it's not fun. And I don't want to do it wrong. Here we have results that are corrosion resistant, waterproof, and hopefully I never have to do this again. We have another learn from my mistakes moment. When I placed all the holes in the sides, I measured and made them evenly spaced. I made them the same on both sides of a corner. I already installed one in one panel, go to install the other one, it hits the end of the first one and it can't actually be installed properly. If I had thought about that ahead of time, I could have offset one set of holes where they're off just a little bit. That worked fine. So now I spent $35 on just 100 of the right size rivet. These are a lot stubbier than the cheap ones. So the stubby ones I can install and they don't hit the other one. Would it cost less money if I planned ahead and did not have them all in the same position? In a few cases, even the stubby one doesn't fit right. But there's a trick to that. When you go to install the rivet, this side pulls in before it crimps. You just put a lot of pressure this way as you pull it, and it should pull right in. And there we go. And after doing that whole camper, I still have over 3,000 rivets to go. That may seem excessive, but I've got another project that could use this exact same rivet. Lots of them. I'll use these up eventually. I think the heat was affecting my brain, because for some reason I thought proper sanding was a good idea too. This whole sheet construction with exposed rivets, that's reminding me of a particular brand of camper that uses the same kind of construction method. I think I'm going to use that for color inspiration. And I have some of this color left over already. These paint guns have a side air adjustment that adjusts the pattern. If you turn it all the way off, you can really spray some distance. That way I was able to get most of the interior tubes, at least the ones I think I'll see. Remember those solar panel rack links I needed? The links that connect the two. It's time to make those. One of the reasons I bought this plasma table, besides the fact it was the cheapest one I could find, was the fact that it was just an arm. The footprint is pretty small. It's got a 2x2 travel. It's a small table, but you can put in big pieces of material. You can let it hang out the sides. I'm just going to slice parts right out of it without cutting up the sheet. I'm going to leave the hoist supporting weight on that side. I think I can cut right there. I turned the cutter up to maximum power, but it's still having trouble with this 1/2-inch material. You can see the sparks trailing way behind the travel, and it's going slow. And traveling that slow, it hit the duty cycle limit pretty quickly, before I could finish a single part. It made most of the shape, and then shut down. I've had this plasma cutter for just over 20 years now, and it's done great on most everything. But on this 1/2-inch thick plate, it just wouldn't cut it. So I upgraded. Harbor Freight had this in stock on the shelf, and it cuts pretty decent. They didn't have the proper CNC connector, but luckily I keep the old cords off all my appliances. Works great. Before I was cutting it this way, which went across every one of these slats on the table, gouging those up. There's a gap between them. I just happened to draw it this way. There's no real need to cut it this way. That will work better. If I cut this way, I won't hit the slats at all. At least I'm only halfway through. I still got 2 more to go. There's a lot left over from the plasma cutting process, but luckily that comes off easily. It usually just breaks right off. There we go. Most all of it's completely gone. Got a little sharp edge I'll hit in the belt sander, but that's about it. The other thing about plasma cutting, especially on thick stuff, I never trust the holes. They're always tapered and they're almost never round. So we're gonna make them round and straight. The assembly went pretty smoothly. Pretty much everything just bolted right back into place. Only issue I had, the air conditioner slipped out of my hand. I ran my finger across the condenser. I'll have to fix that at some point. But other than that, we're all back together. It's not particularly heavy, but it is bulky. And now I'm trapped in the middle of it. All right, that was a bad idea. All right, let's try again. Oh yeah, this is better. Getting there. I found a neat bolt with a handle on it on eBay. Use a flat washer as a spacer to keep these from directly contacting. Hopefully I won't scrape off too much paint then. On the rack itself, I'm going to use a bolt that has a grip length that's way too long. That way it'll freely pivot on it. Our linkage allows us to tilt it and pivot it at the same time. You could drop it down right on that corner where I want it to be. Got my solar panels up and they're absorbing sunlight. Got my electrical juice box here hooked up to them and it's absorbing their electricity. 337, 338 watts. I attached a strap to the side here so I can adjust the angle. We're gonna get these pointing a little more towards the sun. Gonna have to make a more permanent adjuster at some point, but right now this works. 370 watts right now. So far it seems to be working okay, but I did run into a problem. I have a mount for that box inside on the other side. I mounted these solar panels backwards. All the wires are on the wrong side. So I got to pull them off and flip them around and run the wires in the other side. I noticed these connectors say do not disconnect under load. So I'm going to let that charge up all the way and then disconnect them and spin the panels around. Got my solar panels off, so next time I can install them the correct direction. I'm also going to swap out these extra long bolts. Didn't feel like these were really locking it down very well. So I want to be able to tighten down these bolts and lock the other pivot points also. Tighten these down a little bit. And then tighten these down a little bit. Now it actually feels pretty sturdy. That's not bad. But now we're really going to find out how sturdy it is, because I'm going to install this on a truck. You may have noticed I doubled up on my framework here, which is totally unnecessary for solar panels. I'm going to use this to lift it up to install it on a truck. Now I'm going to install this on a truck, but it's not going to be the same truck. This is going in a different truck, because I have a problem with the first one. I have a problem with this truck, and a few of you already commented that I was going to run into this. This truck is a 2002 model. There are no records of it ever being imported into this country. By the level of corrosion on it, oh yeah. There is no passage anymore for fluid. I think it might have been working on the docks near a cargo ship, got caught in a line, and dragged onto the Pacific Ocean all the way here and just washed up in LA somewhere. But no matter how it got here, because it's a 2002, I cannot put this on the road till it's 25 years old. For the next couple of years, this is relegated to yard duty. So I'm not putting that camper back on it. But I'm fine with that, because when I built this camper, I also built in a backup plan, so I thought that might happen. There were 2 extra squares drawn into that bed that I didn't use for anything. My layout on the bed right here is all full scale. I have the important stuff. I have where I should put things. I have where I shouldn't put things. But in that build, I never used these squares. Those squares correspond to this box and that box on this truck. Let's see if it fits in there. This piece of angle iron has been welded to the bed quite thoroughly. And I don't know what its purpose is, but I do know it's in my way. There's no way I'm cutting those welds. Now I got more room. Gotta get this tailgate open. Normally opening a tailgate isn't a big deal, but the hinges on this are pretty rusty. Oh, they're better than before. Oh, they're bending something. It's down enough. That one bent down pretty good, and it looks like it's cracking off. We'll just completely ignore that for now and worry about it later. So far, this is working out pretty well. I'm going to need to extend the bed a little bit, but that's why I didn't worry about the tailgate. I'm pretty happy with the way that all fits together. The rear window lines up so I can see out the back. It sort of fits with the size of the cab, and the roundness kind of works together. I think that's a good fit. The only real problem I see at this point is how I'm going to get those solar panels back on up there. I think ladders are going to be involved. Trucks make good work platforms. This tailgate hinge doesn't work anymore and bent down quite a bit, leaving a big gap. I'm just going to cut this thing right off, take the tailgate away. I know I have to extend the bed out to at least go past the end of the camper. The question is, how far do I go? There certainly is no issue with weight capacity. I can go as heavy as I want. I briefly considered an entire extended outdoor patio area around the end, and then maybe a shade, an awning, all that kind of stuff. Could put it on there, but it would get pretty far back, and there might be a bit of a departure angle issue. So what I decided to do is put these tires in the middle of the bed. I measured from the front over, we're around 49 inches. So just to give us a round number, I think I'm gonna make the bed 100 inches long. The camper's 8 feet, so I'll have a few inches at the end. And I think that'll look better because it always looked like these rear tires were too far to the rear of the bed anyway. Making the bed longer and putting them in the middle, I think that'll be just right for this truck. Before I extend the bed, I gotta make sure this is sitting in the right place. I already moved it side to side to get it in center, but the whole thing is tilted upwards. There's a pretty substantial gap here, and a lot less here. So I'm just going to lift up the back until that's level, and then we have a starting place. The top edge of this bed was made with just 1x1 angle material, and then sheet steel was added to the outside. And I got a little bit of this 1x1 left over from another project. It does extend past the door. It doesn't give me my full 100 inches, it ends up being 98, but I already have it here. And if I wanted to go any more, I'd have to go out and buy another piece of this stuff. So 98 inches is it. The gap is about 1.5 inches right here. I've got some 1x1 tubing. I'm going to attach a top rail, and that will give me a straight line the entire length, and not only have a 1/2 inch gap, but a piece of weather stripping or some kind of foam seal will do that. Sometimes you have to feed the welding cables through some weird places to get where you need to be, like through the suspension. I got the top tube and the piece of angle in here, so I have a little bit of bracing. It's still too flexible at this end, so I'm not going to put the weight out here. This line of rivets corresponds to a major brace inside. So I'm going to use some hexagonal spacers and stack these under this brace so I can set this down, and then I'll be able to take out my support jack and work on the floor. I'm looking at the gap between the top rail and the camper. That looks pretty even. This floor is diamond plate steel, and luckily I've got a good chunk of that left over from the shop truck project. We just got to fish this out of here. I cut that leftover sheet of diamond plate into a few different squares to make up the sides and the bottom. I'm using every last inch of travel on this table, and then a lot more. My fancy metal stand almost fell off. I only got it resting on one caster wheel. But did the job, almost. Now I'm about 1 inch shy of finishing the cut. Now I've got the top rails as my actual index point. I'm hanging the side off the top rail and meeting up with the old end of the bed. And right now there's absolutely no floor whatsoever. We'll put that in later. I've got some hefty pieces of angle to make the corners. They're going to go all the way to the original bed and then attach to the side. Right now I want to make sure I got both ends even. So I'm going to drop the floor in. I think I can just set it on the bottom of these angles. It's going to sag in the middle, but at least I can see if the ends are right. That side needs to go up about 1/4 inch. But it's pretty close. Just a little adjustment, we should be good. Because I used a top rail that was all one solid piece, I'm pretty confident that's all in a straight line to the top edge. But the bottom edge, it's got some wiggle to it. So under here, I'm going to take a square and square that edge up with the frame. And once I square it up, then I can weld it in place and it'll be sturdy. Just a little bit over. And that should do it. I cut up another piece of that real hefty angle to make a cross member. Even put some 45-degree angles at the end to make it fancy. And I thought about installing it this way with the flange outwards, which would give me the flattest back. But then I realized my taillights probably will need to move. As I recall, you have to have your taillights within 24 inches of the end of the vehicle, and those are about 22. So they're technically legal, but they're not very easy to see. And I want to make sure no one rear-ends me. So what I'm going to do is flip this around, put it in this way, and then I should be able to inset taillights into the back. I think that'll be better. I added a few more hefty angle supports too. The short bed has become a long bed. Let's see if this is worth it. Floor's nice and sturdy, and the air is nice and cool. Yeah, this is worth it. I bought myself a sheet of 1-inch thick rigid foam board and the cheapest construction adhesive I could find. This is a bonds to most common building materials. This seems common. Quick non-pro tip. Do not load construction adhesive in an air-powered caulking gun. Yeah, it's sprayed everywhere. Got a little bit of a mess here. But it's sure gonna be stuck on. I turned the compressor way down on pressure, so let's see how this goes. This time I'll bring you along for the ride. Too bad you didn't get that blooper. Oh, still fast. Yep, fast. Whoa, hey. Okay. All right, that was quick and easy. It's a learning process, but now you know what not to do. I made a lot of progress. The panels fit in there very nicely. You can just feel the difference in temperature between the metal and the insulation. And I pretty much got this whole wall done. And most of the other wall. Started in on the ceiling. I'm using these slightly fuzzy welding magnets. That'll hold the panel up while the glue dries. Well, I ran out of adhesive. Somehow I completely misjudged how much I was going to use. Might have had something to do with losing half the tube the first time I pulled the trigger. But either way, next time I go to the hardware store, I need a couple more. There's a lot more to do eventually. But right now, I'm happy with the progress. So I'm gonna end this video here. Well, I'm gonna end this video out there. It's a little cramped in here. Not bad when you're laying down, but sitting up is tight. Well, that's it for this video. I made that camper a lot sturdier, and now it's waterproof. There's still things to go on it, like wiring and finishing up the interior. I'll need to build a new tailgate, and I think the tailgate needs to turn into a ladder to handle this drop. This truck's a lot taller. And one big question I have, and I don't know the answer to, I don't think that solar panel rack is ready for driving yet. So I have a choice of either making that sturdier with some kind of positive adjustment, or make it collapsible. Those solar panels already fold up. I can make the whole frame fold up so I can pack it away when I'm driving and then just deploy it when I'm parked. I'm seeing pluses or minuses either way with that, and I'm not really sure what to do. But let me know what you think, because you guys have a lot of good ideas out there. I'm real happy to see that this now fits on a second vehicle, and this truck's road legal, so I can actually drive this one around really slowly and after I fix the brakes. But at some point, I'll be able to drive it around. And then, in a few years, I can get that little mini truck registered and drive with that. Either way is a win, and either way is fun. Hope you guys are having fun too, and we'll see you next time.